As many of you know, that OECD is tasked with keeping an eye on our state policy that might affect conservation districts and our producers. And we are represented at the state capitol by Gary Huddleston and Justis Huddleston of the Huddleston Investments. They do a great job of representing us and keeping us abreast of current issues. So today we are happy to have Justis joining us to update us about the 2021 legislative session. So Justis.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate that. Yeah, guys, I just wanted to start with just a brief rundown of elections and sort of show where we are now in the legislature and what we have to look forward to, as well as sort of highlight some of the bigger issues that are in front of the state today. So last year in 2020, Oklahoma's record-breaking 69.25% voter turnout paved the way for Republicans to gain House seats, keep the Senate stable, and to beat a congressional incumbent. Republicans picked up 5 seats in the House of Representatives that pushed their supermajority in the chamber to 82 Republicans to 19 Democrats. 3 incumbent Democrats, that was Representative Albright, Branham, and Meredith, all lost their races, while Republicans were also able to pick up 2 open seats that had been vacated by Democrats. Those were Representative Perryman in Chickasha and Representative Loring in Miami. In the Senate, incumbent Democrat Senator Allison Eichley Freeman was defeated by Republican challenger Cody Rogers in Senate District 35, which was previously Republican held by Senator Stanislawski, but had been vacated due to term limits. Democratic candidate Joanna Dossett, who's actually the cousin of Senator J.J. Dossett, was able to claim victory. The Senate remains a Republican supermajority at 38 Republicans, 9 Democrats, and 1 vacancy. State Senator Stephanie Bice narrowly defeated the incumbent Congresswoman Kendra Horn here in CD5 in Oklahoma City. Bice's state Senate seat will be filled via special election, which will pit the Democratic nominee Molly Uten against Republican nominee Jake Merrick on April 6th. Oklahoma's 4 other congressional seats all stayed Republican. Congressmen Hearn, Mullen, Lucas, and Cole all retained their seats. Senator Jim Inhofe also won his race, and the entire Oklahoma federal delegation has returned to all Republican. In the only statewide race on the ballot in 2020, Republican Corporation Commissioner Todd Hyatt handily beat a Libertarian challenger to his office. Additionally, there were 2 state questions during the general elections last year, State Question 805 and 814, which were both soundly defeated. 805 would have removed judges' ability to use sentence enhancements for repeat offenders of nonviolent crimes, and 814 would have changed the funding ratio for the state's Tobacco Settlement Endowment and Trust, TSET, and it would have allowed the legislature to appropriate 75% of TSET's profits. Both of those state questions, of course, were defeated at a 60 to 40% margin. The 58th session of the Oklahoma legislature convened at noon on February 1st. Their first deadline, which was committee deadline, was last Thursday. Bills that failed to receive passage from their assigned committees have now become dormant and will come back to life at their current point in the process next year during the second session of the 58th legislature. The Senate, due to the inclement weather we had, it's hard for me to remember if that was last week or 2 weeks ago at this point, but they extended their deadline for bills in full Senate appropriations and budget to this Wednesday. So after committee deadline in the House, there's only 529 House bills and 1 joint resolution left, which that represents about a 75% reduction in measures that were introduced. The House had introduced 1,942 bills. It's expected there'll be a 50% or greater reduction in Senate measures after their deadline this Wednesday. The Senate introduced 1,034 bills. The next deadline, which is third reading in the Chamber of Origin, also known as the crossover deadline, will be next Thursday, March 11th. Leadership in the House has slightly changed this year. Representative Terry O'Donnell has moved from Majority Whip to Speaker Pro Tem, replacing Speaker Harold Wright, who termed out last year. Of course, Representative Newton and Senator Yeck remain as our chairman for appropriation subcommittees on natural resources and regulatory services in the House and Senate, respectively. So onto the budget, which I think everyone believed was going to be a large concern this year, as it always is. It was originally believed that the state could be in a budget hole about as high as $1.5 billion. Those were numbers being thrown around about September through November of last year. The State Board of Equalization, though, has certified $9.6 billion for lawmakers to appropriate in fiscal year 2022. That February certification represented an increase of $1.1 billion, or 14% more than the $8.5 billion which they'd certified in December. That $8.5 billion certified in December was considered to be a very rosy projection at the time, but they've certified it. They say we actually have $9.6 billion to spend this year. Of course, we're going to have to about 200 million of that will go toward Medicaid expansion, which was passed during the general elections via State Question 802. So last year, the legislature for fiscal year 21 appropriated $7.7 billion in budget. Most state agencies received a 4% cut due to the coronavirus pandemic. The legislature looked ahead and knew that they thought receipts would be down, decided to cut mainly across the board. The overall appropriation was a 3% reduction from the fiscal year 20 budget. However, the Conservation Commission's fiscal year 2021 appropriation of 12.658 and some change million represented a 2% increase from fiscal year 2020, which meant that Conservation Commission was one of the only agencies to actually receive a budget increase last year. Additionally, last year, we were able to work with Chairman Wallace and Thompson to secure a $17.5 million bond order at a 35%, 75% federal match to repair high hazard flood control dams. The governor's 2022 executive budget calls for a 12.158, 644,000, let me say that again, calls for $12,158,644 appropriation to the Conservation Commission. That's a $500,000 decrease from the actual fiscal year 2021 appropriation. We've already had discussions with A and B subcommittee chairman, and they've assured us that they will step up to the plate for us during budgeting, as of course, after all, the executive budget is a suggestion, and it's the legislature's duty to actually appropriate and budget what they do with their money. Finally, Senator Treat and Representative Eccles' Senate Bill 1031, which extended virtual meeting provisions to those which were originally enacted last year at the beginning of the COVID crisis, have been extended. That bill was signed February 10th by the governor, and that'll allow our districts to be able to continue to meet virtually until 30 days after the expiration or termination of a health emergency order. That's sort of where we stand right now. I'm very open to any questions anyone may have. I know that I was sort of fast and furious there, but that's where we stand in the legislature this year. Just in general, things are going pretty well. The legislature has more or less rectified any disagreements they had with the governor when they had to quickly override his veto last year. You'll recall that after the legislature budgeted, the governor vetoed several of their bills relating to budget and agency appropriations, and the legislature actually overrode Governor Stitt's veto, their first override of Governor Stitt's tenure, about 4 hours after the veto signature. So that was an impressive feat last year, and it was a wild session seeing COVID come in and see us how we deal with that. But from there, any questions, and I'd be happy to answer. Well, if there's no questions, I just want to say that we really appreciate Sarah and Larry and Trey and everyone. We love representing the Association of Conservation Districts. We do great work. You all do fantastic work in reaching out to your representatives and senators. At any time we go to an office, we hardly have to explain what it is that the Conservation Commission and the conservation districts do, because you guys are so in touch with your legislators, and we truly appreciate that. It helps us tremendously when it comes to things like getting a budget increase when everyone else is being cut. Legislators truly appreciate what you guys do, and just continue to keep up that good work.
Great. Thank you, Justis. That partnership we have with you and your dad has been great, and we continue to look forward to the future as we have made some great strides with your assistance there at the state capitol. So thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
So at this time, as we realize we are in 2021, and along with that, we do have a new presidential administration, and with that comes some policy changes. So we are great and fortunate to have with us today both Coleman Garrison and Keith Owen with NACD. And I'm going to ask Keith if he will go ahead and start out by bringing us some updates and his thoughts on what we have to look forward to now.
Thank you, Larry. Good morning, everyone. And as many of you know, my name is Keith Owen. I'm your South Central Region representative for the National Association of Conservation Districts. I am located here in Oklahoma. Many of you may know that I was an Oklahoma Conservation District employee for about 10 years. In addition to that, I've worked for several of our state and federal agencies. So I've got a pretty good handle on what will and what won't work in the conservation district realm. What I'm going to talk about really quick is some of our funding opportunities through NACD, and then Coleman Garrison, my fantastic colleague with NACD in Washington, D.C., is going to talk about what's going on in that part of the world. What I'm going to do real quick is share my screen. And let's make this big and pretty. All right, your National Association of Conservation Districts in Oklahoma has been working with the State Conservation Partnership, specifically on our technical assistance grants to districts. And it's what we call the TAG program, or the Technical Assistance Grants Program. And it was created in 2017 as a cooperative agreement between NRCS and NACD to help bridge the gap at that time in employment. More work than there was folks to do work. So we were trying to bridge the gap with district funded technicians. These technicians were specifically hired to help NRCS with the workload on technical assistance, EQIP, and CSP. Most recently, at our 2020 annual meeting in Las Vegas, that partnership was renewed, and there was an additional $15 million set aside to go to districts in the U.S. and territories. Let's look at distribution of those funds by NRCS region. The NACD South Central region, which consists of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana, actually straddles the central and southeast NRCS region. So you can see where those funds went to for the 2018, the 2019, and the 2020 program year. If those of you that are a little more food minded and you prefer pie charts, this is basically the same information. And if you look at it, for the most part, it's mostly evenly distributed. When you look at the size and number of districts in the West region, it would be expected that that section of the pie is a little bit larger. Here's where those funds went to as far as what Farm Bill Conservation Program. You can see the three different colors of blue represent technical assistance, the CSP program, and the EQIP program. For the Southeast and the Central, again, not necessarily even amounts. There was a larger amount in these years that went to the EQIP program, but fairly even across the South and Central region. Now, what does this mean for our South Central NACD region? We've got a little bit smaller piece of the pie. Still $3 million came to the South Central region. How did that money get spent? Again, split up between technical assistance, the CSP program, and the EQIP program. By far the lion's share in our region went to EQIP. How are we spending that in each state? You can see Oklahoma there, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. In 2018, a pretty small amount, and then this is total dollars through the TA grant program to each state. Oklahoma got off to kind of a slow start, but then really made up for that in the 2019 and 2020 year, and priority requests to fund most of those projects has gone in for the 2021 fiscal year. Again, through Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, you can see how it was split out between technical assistance, CSP, and EQIP. Oklahoma almost evenly splits that between the 3 conservation programs. Now, I would be remiss in talking to my conservation district sisters and brothers if I didn't try to provide you some additional opportunities to fund programs in your district. One of the first ways you can do that, which is an excellent program, is the NACD Urban Agriculture Conservation Grant Initiative. This is a program that provides grant funding to district programs that promote urban agriculture. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be in New York City or Los Angeles to be eligible for the Urban Ag Conservation Grant Initiative. You can go to our website, obviously nacdnet.org. Under the What We Do tab, you can select the Urban and Community Ag tab and get more information about that. This can be urban and community gardens. It can be school gardens. It can be outreach to underserved populations and underserved groups of farmers and ranchers. It really has a great outreach message through this program. I would encourage every district in Oklahoma to take a look at it. The South Central region has been unfortunately underrepresented in this grant initiative, so I would encourage everyone to take a look at it. The next is the Friends of NACD grant program. Again, this is an opportunity to get a small cash grant to fund some of your possibly conservation education outreach activities, other district activities that you're finding a hard time finding funding for. This comes 100% through donations to the Friends of NACD grant, or the Friends of NACD organization, and then they pass through that money to conservation districts. Last year, they were able to offer 4 grants of $2,500 each. And this year, they're hoping to increase either the amount of the grants or the numbers of grants. Not exactly a cash in your pocket type of opportunity, but when we are able to go back to meeting in person, I encourage every conservation district board and every conservation district employee to look at the opportunity to attend the NRCS Conservation Planning Boot Camp in Nebraska. This is a pretty heavy commitment, both by the employee and by the district, but all it will cost the district is the salary time for that employee to go to the training. Room and board and all of the training is covered through a partnership with NRCS and NACD, and this is an excellent way to increase the training and the value of your district employee. This is the same training that NRCS employees go through. The district employee will be training side by side with NRCS staff, and this is an excellent opportunity. It is a 3-week commitment. I don't think they make you stay there on weekends unless the fishing's good, but it is a heavy commitment, but I think it would pay great dividends for a district employee and for a district. NACD does have several digital publications that are free to anyone. All you need to do is go to nacdnet.org to sign up for these. The e-resource comes out every Tuesday. The resource, which is a larger digital publication, is quarterly. Our forestry notes comes out once a month. And then the conservation clips comes out every Friday. If you're a district employee and you're looking for things to include maybe on social media, your Facebook page, or to link to for newspaper articles or something like that, all 4 of these digital publications are an excellent source for that. Real quick, we're going to run through some of our upcoming events. Obviously, Coleman is going to talk about our virtual advocacy week, the week of March 22nd. That's coming up pretty quick. Our NACD summer meeting, everybody cross your fingers and toes. At this point, is still being planned as an in-person meeting in Chicago, the 24th through the 27th of July. And again, fingers crossed, our South Central region meeting in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, August 12th through the 13th of this year. I appreciate everyone's support in, of course, my region, but things are always a little closer to home here in Oklahoma. This is where my heart is. And I appreciate everyone's support in making sure that as NACD, we keep our promise for every acre, every American, every day. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Coleman, if you'll turn your camera on, I will transfer everything to you.
Fantastic. While Keith is doing that, good morning to you all. My name is Coleman Garrison. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for NACD. And while Oklahoma itself may not be at my heart like it is for Keith, I'm about 30 minutes south of the Red River from Texas. So the South Central region is certainly home for me, even if I'm currently living in Washington, D.C. I'm going to provide y'all a kind of update on where things are in DC with a new president, with the Democrat Party taking over the Senate and continuing to control the House, and things that we are paying attention to in DC as it relates to conservation policy. So let me share my screen here for y'all. So a quick refresher, and I'll go through this quick since I know we're running up against a scheduled break and I don't want y'all to lose chance on that. But when you look at the policymaking process, there's a lot of different points that you must think about. The chamber must pass something. You had the House of Representatives passing Biden's stimulus bill late last week over the weekend. The Senate obviously still has to pass it for it to be signed into Congress. Once a bill, as Kevin Norton mentioned earlier, the Farm Bill passing in 2018, they are finishing the rulemaking process or have finished the rulemaking process. That can take several months to a couple years, as we've seen this time. And then ultimately enforcing or implementing the bill on the ground level. So this is gonna be a quick overview for y'all, but hopefully is helpful. As Keith mentioned as well, we are having our virtual advocacy week since we cannot have a normal legislative fly-in here in a couple of weeks. Hearing from Mr. Huddleston earlier speaking at the Texas Legislature, he mentioned how much relationships are important, and that is maybe why the Oklahoma Commission received additional funding in their last go-round. Knowing your members of Congress, knowing their staff is vitally important to getting whatever it is you want passed or included in the law to be included. Someone is always telling their message. Someone is always out there pushing their point of view. So you need to make sure you are also there communicating what is important to you, and in this case, conservation districts that you represent. Rural farm representation continues to be very low. In 2022, based on the most recently completed census, many states are going to be redistricting, which means that in some states like Texas, you'll probably add several members of Congress. In other states, potentially in thinking towards the Midwest, Ohio, Michigan, you may be losing representation. But over the last several redistricting processes, you've seen concentration of districts in the cities. That is why you look at Western Oklahoma, where Frank Lucas represents, and they have tons of land, many counties, not as many people. So that is just even more important if you are advocating on behalf of kind of agricultural issues or conservation. You have to understand many of the members of Congress will not be representing agriculture areas. So that is just another reason why it is so important to be a good advocate for what you're working on. Again, we'll skip probably most of this, but so you look at the Farm Bill. Where is the Farm Bill? It's every 5 years. Most of the Farm Bill dollars are in nutrition. Conservation there in red, part of the pie, receives only 7% of total Farm Bill dollars, which is still a fairly large chunk of change, $60 billion over the course of the 10-year budget window. So that is something that Congress, as well as NACD, will begin to be focusing on here in the next year or two, is the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill. It is a regular cycle and something that we will be, of course, communicating with our members about what they want to see in the next Farm Bill. Appropriations every year. The Conservation Technical Assistance Program is vital to NRCS operations. Many of the grants and agreements that individual districts, that states, that NACD have are funded out of the CTA program. Our urban grants that Keith talked about, the conservation technical assistance grants that Keith mentioned, the boot camp that district employees are able to receive. Much of that funding comes out of the CTA program, and it is something that we are constantly advocating for with members of Congress in DC. Other important programs, the 319 program, the watershed programs that I know are very important in Oklahoma, are other issues or other programs that are annually appropriated. But the bulk of the rest of my time, while also hoping to answer any questions that y'all have in the chat box, is what's happening in 2021. Climate change and the role of agriculture, or the role that agriculture can play, is getting a lot of focus. Kind of kicking off the new 2021 calendar, Robert Bonney, who is the former undersecretary under President Obama over NRCS and the Forest Service, came out with a paper basically saying, here's what President-elect Biden can do in the first 100 days to advance many priorities. Included in that list was the creation of a carbon bank at USDA. The theory being that USDA would be purchasing carbon credits that farmers are producing based on the practices they're implementing and the amount of carbon that is being stored in the soil. This would be either in partnership or alongside or potentially replacing. There wasn't a lot of details, but the private market that many folks have, or that many folks are hearing about, private carbon markets that will pay producers for carbon sequestered. So you have private carbon markets, you have a federal carbon bank, tax credits for carbon sequestration are being discussed as well amongst the stakeholder and congressional community. Is there another scheme that we haven't even thought of yet that may be coming out there that someone is going to propose to get Congress to pass or USDA to implement? But the role that agriculture can play in sequestering additional carbon in the soil is a hot topic of conversation right now in Washington, D.C. And I know that we at NACD have spoken with Oklahoma leadership about the role that districts have played in prior carbon programs in the state of Oklahoma, the role that districts have played in verifying and providing technical assistance to farmers to create those carbon credits. And I think that's something that NACD sees as a potential benefit for districts across the country. They are all in our counties for the most part. They already have that local relationship with farmers. How can districts play a role in any of these carbon schemes that are taking place? NACD has also participated in an organization called the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, which is a consortium of organizations that are trying to create a private market. But some of the principles we are trying to push in any of these schemes is that conservation technical assistance, the local expertise on the ground, has to be paramount in anything you do. That districts can serve a role at the local level, helping to implement, helping to provide the technical assistance, helping to provide the verification services that are needed, that a practice was installed, or potentially the verification needed that carbon was ultimately sequestered. You need to pay attention to existing good actors in the agriculture sector. There are already farmers and ranchers doing the right thing. How do we make sure that they are recognized for the good work they are doing so we don't lose the carbon that they have already been sequestered? And then the question around, are we paying for actual practice implementation, or are we paying for actually checking to make sure that the carbon that they say they're going to sequester has been sequestered? That is a hot topic of conversation, knowing that in all parts of the country, practice such as cover crops may not sequester as much carbon as in Iowa or Ohio. So those are some of the questions that we are participating in those discussions. NACD did pass a series of resolutions supporting many of these policy outcomes, that districts have a role and that they should be verifiers and technical assistance providers on the ground. So we just look forward to continuing to work with our members to advocate for districts, advocate for technical assistance in these kind of carbon schemes. with the Biden administration coming in, there's going to be a lot of also focus on regulations that the prior Trump administration passed. The Trump administration passed a rewrite of the WOTUS rule. It is now called the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, although WOTUS is certainly still the common term that folks recognize. The Biden administration has indicated they're going to be reviewing that rule and deciding whether or not they want to propose an update to the Trump administration's version of WOTUS. The Trump administration passed several Endangered Species Act related regulations. They rewrote the National Environmental Policy Act, so NEPA rules, as well as a series of posts on wildfire concerns and how you manage wildfires and what is allowed when it comes to that on federal lands. So there's a whole series of administrative actions that the Trump administration took that the Biden administration is reviewing right now on whether they want to reverse them and propose new updates. So those are additional issues we're going to be paying attention to. Something that I briefly heard Kevin Norton mention earlier on, I was only able to listen to about 5 minutes of it, but NRCS capacity in USDA structure. As Kevin mentioned, starting in the 2015-2016 timeframe, NRCS really started to lose capacity at the local level. And there were a series of reasons for that I won't necessarily go into right now, but certainly they have kind of started to rebound a bit in the last year and a half. I was really pleased to hear that NRCS has received direct hiring authority. I believe I wrote down for 1,500 employees through September of 2021. That is something that will hopefully hasten the pace of NRCS capacity hiring at the local level. It's something we will continue to push through our technical assistance appropriations requests, as well as regulatory at NRCS. But USDA structure is something that we've also seen a lot happen in the last 3 or 4 years under the Trump administration. As Kevin alluded to, NRCS moved from the Natural Resource Environment Mission Area with the Forest Service into the new Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area alongside FSA and RMA. It was great to hear that he felt some efficiencies could be taken place when the Farm Bill is being implemented. So that is great news to hear. But alongside that structure was the creation of the Business Center at FPAC. And I know many of you who may have contracts or agreements or grants directly with NRCS may have had your own personal experiences with the Business Center and the successes and potential failures that has had over the last couple of years. I know I've spoken directly with Sarah with OECD about some of the concerns that they've had with making quick progress on various grants and agreements. So what happens with the Business Center, what that looks like, does NRCS take back some of those authorities from the Business Center? Is there a push to move NRCS back within NRE with the Forest Service? I mentioned the name Robert Bonney earlier, the prior NRE Undersecretary for the Forest Service and NRCS. And then he was also the one that put forward the paper that supported the creation of a carbon bank. He has been appointed as a leadership position under the newly nominated and newly confirmed Secretary Vilsack. So he has that history of what the Natural Resource Environment Mission Area looked like under the Obama administration. He has a real deep understanding of how many of those functions, hiring, technology, office space, grants and agreements operate for NRCS. So you can imagine he will have some say in what the best structure would look like. NACD has been passing along our thoughts where things maybe have not worked as well as was originally proposed. And we look forward to continuing to work with the new department officials over there about what that will look like. Kevin Norton mentioned that there is a new deputy undersecretary for the FPAC mission area, just getting started, I believe, last week. We don't have a new NRCS chief or undersecretary. The undersecretary position would be Senate confirmed, so that may take a while to get appointed, but the NRCS chief is not. So I don't have any insight into when that may be appointed, but it's certainly something that we are looking very closely at when that will take place. Is it someone that obviously we will look very close or work very close with as we look to continue advocating for districts? And then the last bullet point before I pull down my PowerPoint was the 2023 Farm Bill right around the corner. Even if it does seem several years away, NACD will certainly be starting our internal process of coming up with our sets of principles and requests for what we want to be talking to Congress about as we move towards the next Farm Bill. That was a lot of information in a quick amount of time, I understand. And I believe we're up against a break right now, so I want to make sure y'all have a chance to grab some coffee or eat lunch. But until Sarah tells me to stop talking, I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all have through the chat function, I believe is the preferred method for that. Additionally, you can reach out to myself or Keith with any questions on NACD or NACD advocacy. Larry and Sarah can get you in touch with me. Happy to just be a resource for y'all at the federal level. NACD's mission is to represent the nation's 3,000 districts at the federal level with Congress and the administration. So really enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to speak here and answer any questions or get pulled from stage.